What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, July 28th, 2017, almost to the end of the month here. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. A lot of interesting things are going on. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And, of course, this being Friday, thank goodness it's Friday, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 with her unique perspective on the world. Now, over in the White House and the Congress, they're not even being polite about it anymore. In fact, it's starting to look more like the Parliament than the Congress over there, where they're out there screaming and yelling at each other. And Lindsey Graham is out there saying, don't you dare fire Jeff Sessions. Don't you dare do it. There will be all kinds of heck to pay if you fire Sessions. Now, of course, the president is allowed to fire anybody he wants. And you have to wonder, why is Lindsey Graham and so many other people, trying to protect Jeff Sessions? Well, because Jeff Sessions has been protecting Hillary Clinton and the narcocracy. And right now we're coming up on that August recess. And during the recess, the president has the authority to not only fire the attorney general, but to appoint a new interim attorney general whose term would run through the end of the year, which means Trump doesn't have to get somebody that he knows he can get confirmed in Congress, because Congress isn't going to confirm anybody who might actually do the job. And we are still hearing rumors that Rudy Giuliani, who was a very aggressive prosecutor before he became mayor of New York, is still tapped to come on board. Giuliani was, in fact, one of Donald Trump's original choices for Attorney General, and he was told point blank, you will never get him through the Congress. So there's a lot of fear out there about what's going on. And Lindsey Graham is also out there. He wants to put a bill through Congress that can block Donald Trump from firing the special counsel. And again, Trump has the right to fire anybody he wants. But they want to keep Mueller in there because Mueller's on a fishing expedition. Mueller is already in violation of the special counsel statute because he has looked at what he was tasked to look at. He has found nothing, and now he's out there just running rampant across all of Donald Trump's life and that of his associates, just looking for anything he can find that can be used against Donald Trump. Now, apparently, the GOP, the Judiciary Committee, has requested a second special counsel, this one to investigate Hillary Clinton, James Comey, and Loretta Lynch. And, oh boy, I'm wondering what Lindsey Graham is going to say about that one. We don't need another special counsel. Mueller will take care of it. And again, Mueller is compromised. He's got all these conflicts of interest with Hillary, with the Democrats. In fact, the mere fact that he accepted this job to investigate people with whom he has a relationship, that could get him disbarred as a lawyer. The whole thing is a mess, but Congress is pushing for a second special counsel to start looking into what was going on with Hillary Clinton. And boy, there's a lot of stuff to find. We all know they're going to hit pay dirt as soon as they start digging, along with a lot of dead bodies. Now, Judicial Watch is suing the Department of Justice for info, specifically metadata, on these James Comey memos. Now, remember, all of this Russian collusion thing came on up because James Comey came on out and said, well, Donald Trump said something, and I noted it in a memo. I didn't file an official report as required, but it was in the memo. Judicial Watch wants to see the metadata to see exactly when those memos were created, when they may have been edited, and by who. And I think that's a good question. Now, the new White House Communications Director, I'm already starting to like this guy because he's on the warpath against the leakers, and now he's pointing his finger at Reince Priebus. And apparently Scaramucci put out a tweet basically saying Priebus was the one who was leaking out his financial information to the world, because apparently Scaramucci has a net worth of $85 million. And to a lot of people, being that rich is an object of suspicion then and there. that's not true. It's how they made the money. Nobody views George Lucas as suspicious. We know how he made his money. Nobody views James Cameron as suspicious for all his wealth. We know how he made his money. Makes great movies. We all go see. We all pay for the tickets. We buy the Blu-ray discs. But they're trying to tarnish him, make him look bad here. And it turns out Scaramucci was bang spot on, because over at Fox News, Kimberly Guilfoyle confirms Priebus has been the leaker to the anti-Trump media. We're talking about the White House Chief of Staff, the most powerful job in that building, second only to the president, stabbing the president in the back. Geraldo Rivera has come on out and said Priebus cannot be trusted. So, to be a fly on the wall in the next White House staff meeting. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. And let's see now. Over at the FBI, their top lawyer, James Baker, and we've heard that name before associated with other scandals, he is now under investigation for leaking classified information to the media. And apparently he was all buddy-buddy with Comey, and he's now under criminal investigation by the Department of Justice for leaking classified information to the media. These are all Title 18 violations. These are all felonies. We're talking jail time here. And the infighting at the White House is continuing. The National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, is pushing out Middle East Advisor Derek Harvey. So a lot of stuff is getting ready to happen during that August recess. Now, you remember that Imran Awan case, the IT expert. It's now been confirmed he had the login credentials for Debbie Wasserman Schultz's laptop, on which some of those emails that were leaked were stolen. And so now people are starting to ask if maybe Imran was the leaker or one of the leakers. And they wrongfully blamed Seth Rich and then killed him. But we are hearing, according to this article in the Gateway Pundit, Debbie Wasserman Schultz is an absolute wreck. She's barely able to function since Imran got arrested at the Dulles airport. And please don't tell her she's getting really, really depressed, because we know what will follow that one here. Now, the establishment media is refusing to cover this IT scandal. Once again, the corporate media, Fox is starting to cover it. Fox is starting to cover it. In fact, Fox came on out. You remember back when the lawyers who were handling that class action lawsuit against Debbie Wasserman Schultz reported getting threatening phone calls that seemed to be electronically altered. Fox News is saying that it appears the Awans helped Debbie Wasserman Schultz with that technology, which makes sense. That was their job, to help her with electronic computer type stuff. But they're trying to keep a lid on this. Now, we need to do a little bit of a clarification here. There's been a lot of information thrown around, some of it wrong, some of it probably intending to create confusion, and we're now getting a better grip on the story. There had been an earlier report that when the FBI seized the hard drives from Imran Awan's home, that they were in working order and they were destroyed later. That turns out to be completely wrong. Here's what happened. Apparently, Imran Awan was destroying all of these hard drives, and he just threw them in the trash outside of his home along with a bunch of routers and various other computer equipment. One of his neighbors is a Marine, and walking by the trash bin, noticed that this equipment all was labeled as U.S. government property. And being a Marine, he grabbed it all and called the government and said, this appears to be misappropriated hardware. Apparently, this Imran Awan actually threatened this Marine trying to get this hardware back. And at that point, the FBI came on over and took charge of it. And that's when Imran bolted for that airport. Now, we don't know how badly those hard drives are damaged, but there are some amazing technologies out there involving lasers that allow a lot of data to be recovered from a damaged hard drive. If he just banged up the outer cases, it's entirely possible the rotors are still in perfect working order. And if the rotors are in good shape, all you need is a new circuit board to go with them, and you can read all that data off. And clearly there is something on those hard drives that Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the Democrats and Hillary are very, very concerned about. So that's where we are on that particular story. And we're trying to sort out all the real information from the very obvious disinformation that's being put on out there to try and keep up a high degree of confusion. But you can almost smell the panic in the wind between the possibility that Hillary Protector Sessions may be booted out and Rudy Giuliani is going to come on in and be told point blank by President Trump, it is time to deal with all of these scandals. Then you have Imran Awan, who's probably very highly motivated now to try and make some kind of a deal. You have Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who appeared to be starting to make a deal even before Awan's arrest. This thing could be on the verge of breaking wide open, and I would not at all be surprised to see a sudden rush of suicides and strange deaths. Because the bad guys play for keep out there. They're serious, they play for keeps here. Now, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee is accusing top political aides of President Obama of making hundreds of unmasking requests during the 2016 presidential campaign to unmask the names of Americans in intelligence reports, including all of the Trump transition officials. This was an inappropriate use of the data here. Now, over in the Congress, apparently yesterday, Maxine Waters was basically talking to Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. And Maxine Waters seemed to be more interested in getting her face on the camera than actually getting any answers, because she'd ask a question and the Treasury Secretary would try and reply, and she'd cut in. And she did it 12 times. And then when Steve Mnuchin came on out and said, will you let me finish what I'm saying? And Maxine Waters comes back and says, I can recover my time anytime I want. So it's getting out of control. The bad news is the U.S. Senate has just passed their version of the bill approving sanctions for Iran, Russia, and North Korea, because Russia tinkered with last year's election. There is no evidence that it actually happened, but it's now become a prime article of faith in the groupthink of Washington, D.C. We don't even question it anymore. It's the prime assumption. Russia tampered with the election. Those Russians stole the election away from Hillary. How dare they do that? We must punish them. Whatever happened until proven guilty beyond all reasonable doubt? Doesn't apply to Russians. They're not even human beings. For goodness sake. Moscow is out there saying that these new sanctions are threatening strategic stability, which is a very polite diplomatic way of saying that economic wars have a bad habit of turning into shooting wars. And that's the warning they're trying to put on out there. The problem is, I don't think they quite grasp that from the U.S. government's point of view, the only thing that's going to save the U.S. government from its self-created economic meltdown is another war. Or maybe not save it, but at least distract from it. Give the government somebody to blame for it all. Because that worked out there, and big mistake number 2 and big mistake number 1. Yes, times are hard, but there's a war on. Blame the Germans. Blame the Japanese. It's all their fault. Boy, I must have said something to really annoy somebody. They're pounding on my server pretty hard right now. Oh, well, let the children have their tantrum. Now, Russia is apparently sending signs that they are really getting tired of the very childish behavior of the United States government. And they have now sort of stepped up and matched the U.S. Under Obama by asking the U.S. to get some of their diplomatic staff out of Russia, and in turn, they have now seized 2 U.S. embassy compounds inside Russia. So they're trying to send a message. It's a proportional response, and I'm sure the corporate media is going to be out there saying, how dare those Russians do that? Well, we did it to them first. Yes, but we had the right to do it. They were doing bad things. The U.S. government never does bad things. How dare they? So apparently these restrictions on the number of U.S. diplomats allowed to be in Russia take effect on the 1st of September. So that gives those diplomats who are leaving a month to get things packed and moved. It's not a rush job or anything. Moscow is not suggesting to the U.S. yet which diplomats they want to leave. They may, in fact, leave it up to the U.S. and just say it's simply a numbers reduction here. And, of course, to nobody's surprise, the U.S. ambassador to Russia is expressing strong disappointment in the foreign ministry's decision. How could you do this to us? Well, you did it to us first. Yes, but we had a good reason. So things are getting very, very tense over there. PBS has launched a new anti-Russia propaganda 5-part documentary, and it's basically a regurgitation of the false and deceptive claims that have now become official Washington's groupthink. These are the things we believe. This is Washington, D.C.'s credo. I believe that Russia tampered with the election. I don't need any proof. Do you need proof of God? Well, we don't need proof that Russia tampered with the election. We believe. We believe. And they're acting on that belief. And we all look at it and realize how absolutely silly, not to mention dangerous, it all is. Another piece of propaganda that came on out, this was over in Popular Mechanics, which, if you remember how Popular Mechanics came down hard on anybody who questioned the official story of 9/11, you understand Popular Mechanics is just as compromised by the government as anybody else. So they came out with this article, and the headline read, "Kaboom, Russian drone with thermite grenade blows up $1 billion of Ukrainian ammunition." And you read the actual story, and it turns out the drone used is one of these little commercial drones that you can buy off the shelf, which means Popular Mechanics is trying to lay the blame on Russia. But again, it could have been anybody in the eastern Ukrainian republics could have come up with this idea of putting a thermite grenade on a drone and just fly it over the fence and have it set off all this ammunition. And, of course, Popular Mechanics is now sounding the alert about the unrestricted availability of drones to ordinary people. Yet another piece of anti-Russian propaganda. This is from BGR.com. They can't prove that Russia got into the electronic voting machines. They can't prove that Russia interfered with the elections either in the U.S. or in France. In fact, the French intelligence agencies, after that story came on out that Russia was interfering with the French elections, the French intelligence agencies said, we can find no evidence of it. Well, if at first you don't succeed, lie again. And supposedly quoting an anonymous source, they're now claiming that Russia mounted an elaborate Facebook hacking scheme to influence the French presidential election. You know what's going to happen on August 21st? Corporate media is going to be screaming, the Russians stole the sun! The Russians stole the sun! Oh my goodness, we're doomed! Launch the nukes! Launch the nukes! Anything bad that happens, blame the Russians. It was the Russians destroyed my wife's Android phone. They made her drop it in the sink. Okay, Turkey has finalized a deal to purchase an S-400 air defense system from Russia. Yeah, Turkey's moving toward Russia and away from the West. It's significant. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to take a phone call from Andy in Texas. Andy, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Andy?
Hey, Mike, are you there?
Yes, here I hear you. You're on the air.
Okay, aloha snack bar.
Aloha snack bar to you too.
All right, hey, no, listen, The reason why we can't get anything done in this country is, A, we can't get any president in there that we want. We have to take what they allow through the system, and you have to have a ton of money to get into that system to even get past the barrier, which, in fact, is against the Constitution. It doesn't say the guy with the best or most money and best influence can be the president. But what we really need is somebody that we could trust inside the presidential race and whatnot, and then they get in the office, they can put the darn Constitution right in front of them and say, okay, this is the way it is, let's clean house. That's what we need in this country, because that Constitution affords us several different avenues to take care of business, and it also protects our rights. It doesn't give us anything. We the people, have to assert what we want from this country. And what they've done is they've totally trashed the entire Constitution. They haven't taught us what it's supposed to mean. I mean, if you want to know what the Constitution says, you got to go read it yourself. Mm-hmm. And then you have to read the excerpts that the founding fathers who wrote it, you have to read what their intent was behind what they wrote. And instead of, there's no reason for anybody to sit in Congress or in the White House and try to interpret what the Constitution says, because it's interpreted simple by the simple words that were used to write it, and then it's also reinterpreted to make sure that those simple words that do make sense, it's reinterpreted by the excerpts that our founding fathers wrote. So if there's any question to what a simple word means inside the Constitution, it's covered in the excerpts that our founding fathers put together. So the thing here is, it's not really the problem of who we get into the presidency, it's how we get somebody into the presidency. What do you think about that?
Well, obviously, Donald Trump was an outsider, and we overcame a huge amount of election fraud to get him in there. But again, he is surrounded by a completely corrupted system that is just struggling to keep him contained. This warfare is literally breaking into the public view here. Now, the reality is that politics generally goes toward the best-looking, best-funded, best speaker in terms of the available candidates. But originally, the laws regarding campaign funding in this country were set up limiting how much money any one individual, and this was before corporations were considered people, how much money an individual could give to a candidate, so that the poor had as much influence over the candidate as the rich. And what this basically guaranteed was whoever had the largest campaign war chest, it was a direct reflection of their true popular support. Because the more money you had, it meant the more people you had donating. And when they basically took away those chains so that the rich could buy the candidates, that was the first step toward losing our nation. And the second one was when we lost the ability to have honest, fair, and accurate elections. And at that point, the politicians said, we don't need to worry about those voters anymore. Push comes to shove, we'll just make sure only our people are elected. And again, as we've seen, going all the way back to the selling of the president, long before we ever step into a voting booth, the candidates are already filtered and selected, and those who might be a problem are shown the door, like Bernie Sanders. And so we basically get our choice of just who's going to be looting and plundering us and sending our children off to die in wars every election. Trump broke that mold. And that's, even though he's gone along with the war agenda so far, we know he's being lied to by his own people. We know the CIA lied to Trump about Assad gassing his own people. And so I do think that Trump is starting to wake up. In the coming weeks, if we see him fire Sessions and get Giuliani, the first thing he ought to do is he ought to fire Reince Priebus. He cannot have a White House chief of staff who's openly working against him. Anyway, Andy, we got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. More phone calls when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And let us go right back to the telephones. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Doing fine.
Hey, Mike, I hope Trump does sign those sanctions because he knows it's veto-proof. But they're just shooting themselves in the foot like we talked about yesterday. Germany's not going to allow them to cut off the Nord Stream. there's just no way of that being put in, because like most German big machinery companies are using natural gas, and they need that gas. Without that gas, Germany's done.
Well, we're already hearing all over Europe that they're probably going to ignore these sanctions. So this is driving a wedge between the U.S. and Europe. And even worse, Germany is now talking about counter-sanctions against the United States. So this whole nonsense about more sanctions on Russia is actually creating an economic war between the United States and Europe, and neither of our economies are resilient enough to be able to tolerate that.
But you notice how even the globalists, they have that group think across the world, but yet they still comes down to local tribal oligarchy when they got to compete against each other, right?
Yes.
See, so that's basically the wedge, like now they're saying in Europe, this country, because look at the vote. You can just see by the vote of who voted and who didn't for it. They can see who they can trust and not trust, and obviously they can't trust their globalist buddies over here anymore. Hey, Mike, I don't know if you talked about this yesterday, about the IMF's Christine Lagarde saying we're probably going to wind up moving to Beijing.
Yeah, we did mention it yesterday.
Got to go where the money goes, huh?
Yeah.
Where the money flows is where the power goes.
They're going where the action's going. The IMF has basically signaled that they understand the United States is an empire in decline, and that it's only a matter of time before our debt-burdened society economy is going to implode. And yeah, the IMF wants to be where the world's financial center is, and it's not the United States anymore. It's not London. It's all pivoting over to China.
It's the Belt and the Road, Mike. That's the future. We've been saying that for how long? And this country is finished as it is now. The way the system's set up now, it's crumbling. Nobody can see that, what's going on with the corruption. We said this before, even it's just like Rome. People need to record these events, because you're going to look back and say, what the heck happened? And like in Rome, and they didn't have a video camera back then.
No, they didn't. And they had a guy with a chisel and a block of marble, and he was saying, "Stand still, stand still, stand still." And but the other parallel, of course, that I keep going back to is the collapse of the former Soviet Union. And the parallels are obvious. They bankrupted their economy, overspending on war. The central government was exposed, along with their media, as constantly lying to the public. And it eroded trust and ultimately cooperation by the Soviet citizens with that government, and eventually it just imploded. And there was very little bloodshed, and that is precisely what our country.
Yeah, Mike, by the way, I don't watch the news. I don't watch TV, really. And I watched that Maxine Waters, asking for her time back. I mean, it's just, that's what your government is now. This is what it's become. It's garbage. It really is. It's just they're garbage. There's nothing redeeming about any of these people.
Do you remember what Mark Twain used to call the Congress? That grand benevolent asylum for the helpless.
Or how about a movie everybody can watch, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington?
Oh, that's a good one. That is a very good one.
It's just sad, man, Mike. Like how these people just, like that previous call about the Constitution, the globalists don't believe in Constitution. That's what we got. The Constitution means nothing to them, so they're not going to change unless they're forced to change by us, we the people. They don't believe in we the people. It's we the sheeple. They be the boss. And then, and that's, and obviously and unfortunately the boss is crumbling our infrastructure, ripped us off, send your kids to die in phony wars, and their kids stay home sucking up suds, drinking martinis and caviar. People got to wake up now, because it's just get ready, because I don't know when it's going to happen, but I'm telling you, Mike, I never seen things so bad. Like Washington, D.C. is just totally dysfunctional. It's unstable.
Yes, I absolutely agree. All
right, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Errol in the Netherlands. Been a while since you called, Errol. What's on your mind today?
Hello, Hold on. Maybe this is too hard. Hello, Mike. This is top, state of the art.
Yes.
I want to say to you, Europe, Russia, Syria. So, let's see. Very quick. I'm very quick. Why is it so difficult for the Americans to see now that they have lost in another war? Syria is lost.
Yes.
They have destroyed that country. They have destroyed the country. They have put on, because they have lost. Yeah,
but they won't admit it. They won't admit it. See, what do you...
They won't admit it. I know.
Oh, okay.
Listen,
what the U.S...
Let me finish.
Yes, sir. Excuse me.
They won't admit it. Why won't they admit it? What is exactly... What are they going to do? They're going to put sanctions on Russia, on North Korea, and Iran. Hello? Am I still here? What beep is that?
I don't know. But I'm hearing it from my end as well. It may indicate that we're being recorded somewhere along the way between our phone and your phone. So greetings to our friends in national surveillance.
Yes, but the interesting part is, again, I always say the interesting part is when you look at the... I did geopolitics for 15 years. I studied geopolitics for 15 years long. Who is closer to Europe and who is further away from Europe? Now, then we got this confirmation. Russia has very much mineral gas. They got very much mineral gas. Europe needs that.
Yes.
Europe needs the mineral gas, exactly. So, I saw on the internet a discussion with a guy that deals in raw minerals. He said, okay, let's see if America can handle the gas to Europe from America. Yeah?
Yes.
In a boat. In a boat.
Yeah, they make these very large ships they're called liquefied natural gas carriers, and they're easy to identify because they've got these giant spherical tanks all along the deck.
Yeah, but when you look at the confirmation in the, how do you call it? The mineral gas will eventually come from Europe. Okay, now, the second part that I want to talk to you about is Syria. Do you know why the Zionists have attacked the mosque? Because Daesh is game over. That's game over for the guys. Israel, yeah?
Yes.
We know what Israel is. The Zionists, when a Zionist can have their place, they're going to do other things. Now you see this in the news. I look at the news, it is like, okay, let's get the mosque. Let's kill the mosque. Okay, ha, 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 ha. I'm like, this is so lame. What a lameness are that. What is that? What's that about? I know Jewish men. I know Jewish people. And they say, I don't want to go to the apartheid state that's called Israel. It's an apartheid state. The Zionists have been there for a long time, and I can say that from the Netherlands. Yes, I cannot been put in jail or nothing, because they know when I call out somebody, I know exactly what I'm talking about, because the Zionists need to be very, very cautious now, because when we see this happening now, today, also, the United Nations, they're also seeing this. When we see these people handling, and they have nuclear weapons, and they are acting like animals.
Yes.
Then we are looking at some very dangerous powers. So, I just want to say to you, Mike, your show is going up right. I want to say to the people that are listening now, give Mike Rivero a hand, and also Claire a hand, because Claire is a musician with some music.
Yes.
Claire makes music. Give a hand. Hey, Mike, thank you for my call, and I wish you the best.
All right, well, have yourself a good weekend. We're going to let you go here. And again, what's going to happen is we all understand that Syria is a major defeat for the U.S. war agenda because it was a stepping stone into Iran. But of course, because the United States tried to justify its presence in Syria without the permission of Syria's government by saying we're really at war with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, it opens up the way for the United States to declare it's a victory. We have won in Syria, even though their actual geopolitical objectives have not been met. It's like the U.S. saying that they won in Iraq, even though all of the reasons that we were publicly given for going into Iraq were lies and therefore could not be accomplished. So, yeah, the U.S. is going to declare victory in Syria and then go on out and make trouble probably down in the Philippines here. All right, apparently we had a caller, Jim in Nevada, saying before the corporations got into campaign financing, the unions had that power. And yes, back then, the unions were exercising their influence on elections. Anytime you get an organized body of individuals who are able to direct their members to vote a certain way or to collect money from them to build pools of capital, it's going to have an impact on the election. But because unions are not 501c3 nonprofit operations, they're allowed to do this. I think it should change. I think ultimately if we're going to have a republic with a democratically elected government, that we ought to go back to a system where every individual is free to make up their own mind and not be coerced by their union, by their bosses, by their teachers, by the politically correct. But again, in allowing that central federal government to become so powerful, it's become a prize that people will do anything to acquire. And sadly, for so many of our recent presidents, once they have it, they're willing to do anything with it. And of course, look at all that the stuff that's coming out about Obama now, with all the unmasking, use of the IRS as a weapon. All right, let's get on over to North Korea, because North Korea had another test missile launch. The corporate media is already declaring it an intercontinental ballistic missile, although it didn't really fly all that far, and it appears to have actually been more of a mid-range missile. But from now on, just like whatever happens, Russia's to blame for it. Anything North Korea launches is going to be described as an intercontinental ballistic threat of some kind. Kim Jong-un goes out and throws a frisbee. Oh my goodness, it's a secret North Korean weapon. Now, unfortunately, I wish Kim Jong-un would tone down the rhetoric a little bit, because he's not helping the situation. Apparently, in response to CIA boss Mike Pompeo suggesting that regime change in North Korea is a good thing, North Korea came on out and said, if you try and do a regime change, we will drop what they're calling the nuclear hammer into the heartland of the United States. I don't know that they can actually do it, but again, North Korea is standing up to the United States. I just wish they would choose their language a little bit more carefully. But then again, Kim Jong-un is not just playing to the United States, he's playing to his own people. And apparently the North Koreans still remember how badly they suffered at the hands of the United States of America all those years ago. And so they seem to be responding very positively to that. Apparently, over in the U.S. Navy, Admiral Scott Swift came on out with a statement saying that if Donald Trump asked, we would nuke China next week. And this is pure political speech, because if Trump were to order a nuclear strike through National Command Authority, this admiral would have to carry it out. It's an order. Launch the nukes. But he's almost cheering this on, right alongside John McCain, who wants to bomb everything until the world loves us. Now, getting on over into Jerusalem and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and because Syria is falling apart, Israel needs another conflict that they can use as a distraction, because Netanyahu is looking at political corruption charges. They need to keep their people afraid of something, and if Syria isn't a threat anymore, then they need to go back and say, oh, look at the Palestinians and look at the Muslims. And apparently Muslim worshippers are throwing stones at the Wailing Wall. Israeli police in response fired stun grenades. They're still fighting back and forth. It's threat of breaking into a religious war, and those are some of the worst kind. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to go back to the telephones here. Mark in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Mike, I get quite a few calls from saying they can lower my credit card rates, and they can give me a free trip to, let's say, Hawaii, or this and that. And usually I just hang up because I know it's phony. But sometimes I'll say, let me just see who's behind it, and I'll hit the one button. It's almost always a Pakistani voice. So what I do a lot of times, last time we really got into it, I'll say how things in Karachi, or Islamabad. What are you talking about? We're right here in California or wherever, somewhere in the United States. They says, who are you kidding, man? Sometimes I'll even play it a little bit and make it like I'm stupid and see what they really want. And then they ask for my credit card number and stuff. So I says, you really think I'm stupid, Mohammed, don't you? Something like that. I'll say. And then they get angry, right? What you talking? And then the last time, as a matter of fact, one jackass made a threat to me. Told me he was going to get me, right? I says, well, just to let you know, this is a gun-free zone. My house is is not a gun-free zone. So, do what you got to do. I called the sheriff's department anyway, just to let them know that this fraud is going on. But sheriff's department around here is basically, I think they must hire from the nearest group home, Yes. So, maybe an IQ of about 70. So, they said, you kid, nothing we can do. I said, I didn't say you said nothing you can do. I'm just telling you that if I have to take care of business, just to let you know, I'll let you know, okay? So, but anyway, the reason I'm bringing this up is I'm thinking the Adeline brothers. Matter of fact, the last time one of those calls came, I was thinking of them then. I'm thinking that they've got some kind of obviously they got to hustle. Now, whether they're funding terrorists or maybe drug dealers or maybe both, or they just got a scam going where they're making themselves rich, I don't know. But I'm hoping that we're going to get to the bottom of a lot of stuff now.
Well,
evidently,
I think one of the real possibilities is that they were blackmailing people. I mean, it was rather amazing. Debbie Wasserman Schultz kept Imran on as a consultant in order to basically get around the fact that he'd been effectively fired by the House of Representatives. So she kept him on as an advisor for something like $120,000 a year. And when this guy was trying to flee back to Pakistan, he sent along $300,000. I don't know if that got through or not. and he had something like another $12,000 on his pocket when he was arrested at the gate. So he was obviously making a huge amount of money somehow from somewhere. But in general, and coming up on the top of the hour here, thank you for the phone call, it does seem like we're in an epidemic of scams. It's open season on the American people, and it's totally out of control, like cybercrime. I get more scam calls than anything else on my iPhone. We'll be back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. So apparently the Chechen leader is saying he's ready to quit his job in order to go over and protect Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. And apparently more and more people are picking up on all this talk coming out of Israel about how it's their destiny to take over the Temple Mount and tear down Al-Aqsa and start building the third temple that will herald the arrival of the Messiah. And again, there actually was a third temple built, but the Messiah didn't show up. So they said, well, that was a renovation, really. That's just a renovation. So we're going to build a new third temple, and the Messiah will show up. Okay, now then, a lot of people expressing concern over the laws being passed by Congress that will criminalize support for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, will criminalize boycotting Israel at all. And the punishments in these bills are staggering. Americans supporting boycotts of Israel over its human rights violations could be hit with fines up to $1 million and 20 years in jail. Now, obviously, this is a slap in the face of that First Amendment, and people ought to be looking at that. And, you know, the irony is back in 1933, the Zionists had absolutely no problem with boycotting Germany when they tried to organize a global boycott against Germany to destroy its economy. And that was okay. But you look at the crimes being committed by Israel, they have no intention of stopping. They just want everybody to stop talking about them. And we have all these traitors to the Constitution in Washington, D.C., who are willing to throw the Bill of Rights into the shredder to please their masters in Tel Aviv. We are under puppet rule. We have a Vichy government in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C., the federal government, the Congress, are far more concerned with pleasing Israel than pleasing the American people. And I think it is time for that to stop. Okay, now then, moving right along here. Interesting article. Kevin Barrett is out with a new analysis of 9/11, saying that 9/11, along with launching the wars as desired by the Project for the New American Century, had a much broader goal of starting the campaign of Islamophobia in the United States. And remember, after the World Trade Towers were destroyed, there was also the anthrax scare, where the anthrax was being mailed to various politicians and media individuals with envelopes and letters that looked like they had been written by semi-literate Muslim people, semi-literate in English. Of course, then it turned out the anthrax that was in it came from the United States Biological Weapons Laboratory, and that whole thing fell apart. But obviously, Israel's goal is to get us all to hate the Muslims. They actually have a special unit in their military that is trained to impersonate various Arab Muslim forces in order to carry out false flags. And you have to wonder, how many times have we been suckered by that? Now, getting back over to Pakistan, you have to wonder about what's going on. Apparently, Pakistani police have arrested 25 members of an informal village council who apparently ordered the rape of a 16-year-old girl as revenge for her brother's rape of another girl. And what was it Gandhi used to say? If we do an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, soon the entire world will be blind and toothless. And I think that probably describes it best of all. Again, in Pakistan, their Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif resigned earlier today after the country's Supreme Court disqualified him from holding office over corruption issues. So the Supreme Court said, you are fired. And Sharif said, you can't fire me, I resign. But however it came about, we need more of that over here. I hope they nail Netanyahu for the corruption. And I do hope that Sessions is fired and replaced with somebody who's really going to bare their teeth and go after the corrupted people in our government, because there are so many of them. And they are destroying this nation with their greed. Now, over in Saudi Arabia, the ascendancy, if you will, of Crown Prince bin Salman is not going along smoothly. And apparently there is a geopolitical contest going on. Some parts of Saudi Arabia want to go back to the old Crown Prince. And there's a major faction fight that threatens to actually break into an internal strife over there. And that might take Saudi Arabia out of the game. Certainly would give them a reason to pull out of Yemen and end that nonsense. We're going to do a quick shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Story coming out of the Real News. Trump's fantasy military budget hides the real costs. And we know that as much money as is being poured into the military that is acknowledged, there's actually a lot more hidden budgets, black budgets. And apparently the gist of this story right now is that in order to get around Pentagon budget caps imposed by law, they're using the foreign war budget, which doesn't have a cap, as a slush fund. They throw money in there, and then it goes from there back to the Pentagon for things like weapons development. We're going to take a phone call. Frank in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, I appreciate you talking about this, what is it, Senate Bill 720, I believe, where all these Republicans and Democrats are finally coming together on something.
Yes, amazing, isn't it?
Make it illegal to boycott Israel. I mean, I think that really tells us where the road leads to. And I don't know this for a fact. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to go out on a limb, because I've heard a couple other people mention it over the past 24 hours. There has not been one word of this matter coming out from the InfoWars group. Isn't that amazing?
I was unaware of that because I don't spend a lot of time over there, but that would be very interesting. But again, early in his career, Alex Jones made a YouTube video, I think it's still up at YouTube, where he just says, I'm a supporter of Israel, and I always will be. And, of course, immediately after that, his operation got a lot of funding coming on in. But let's leave Alex Jones out of the equation here. Your first comment was right on mark. We have a Congress that can't agree on health care. We have a Congress that cannot agree on tax relief. We have a Congress that can't agree on how they're going to help the homeless and hungry in this country. But anything Israel asks for, it's nearly unanimous vote. Cynthia McKinney used to say that if you were a freshman congressman, you were literally required to swear an oath of allegiance to Israel, or you were not going to be allowed to sit in your chair. And I find that absolutely aberrant. And having spoken to Cynthia McKinney on many occasions, I don't think she's lying about that.
No, it rings true to me. She sounds very credible. One more thing. I heard someone was referring to a Rasmussen poll last Friday. It was a guy named Owen Stroyer on a radio. He was hosting a radio show, and he said that this recent Rasmussen poll had stated that the American people's outlook, they're happier than ever before, and then he immediately tied that to the Trump presidency. And Something about that just didn't ring true to me. What's your take on that?
Well, every time somebody comes out with a poll that the people are happy, a lot of people are going to try and take credit for it for their own particular candidate, their party, their agenda. I'm surprised that Rasmussen came out with this result because all the other polls are showing that the American people are struggling economically. They have no confidence that the future is going to be any better. Everyone's concerned about the coming wars, but we know that polls exist in two flavors. And there are the internal polls, ones that actually do try and measure the opinion of the American people, and those results are kept internal to the political system. Then you have the external polls. These are polls that are designed to manufacture and persuade the American public that everything is going really good. And those are just as rigged as the elections and the unemployment numbers in the news.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
All right, have a good day. We're going to let you go. The United States is now urging all of its citizens to leave Venezuela as Maduro urges the opposition to start a dialogue. Maduro is trying to head off a full-on civil war, and he has to know now this is a U.S.-backed operation because the head of the CIA admitted the United States is carrying out another regime change operation in Venezuela. And the State Department is now withdrawing all the U.S. diplomatic personnel and their family members. So it looks like Venezuela is going to become the new Syria. So let's talk about the economic news here because the numbers really are not good. Total government and personal debt in the United States has hit $41 trillion with a T. And to give you an idea of just what kind of a total number that is, it works out to almost $330,000 per American household. That represents 5 years of the median annual income, meaning to pay off all that debt, we'd all have to have jobs, we'd all have to be working, we wouldn't eat, we wouldn't have clothes, we wouldn't have electricity, we wouldn't have a place to live, and then 5 years later the debt would be paid off. That's how bad it really is. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Europe is absolutely not on board with all of these sanctions against Russia, North Korea, and Iran, but especially Russia. The sanctions that are already in place have caused a huge amount of damage economically. And France is saying these are not legal. Brussels is saying we're really under no obligation to go along. And now Germany is talking about counter-sanctions and a trade war between the European Union and the United States. And it would be bad. And yes, that's true. And the danger here is that trade wars, economic wars, are just one step away from shooting war. Okay, I'm getting word now that Priebus is now out as White House Chief of Staff. And apparently General Kelly is in. Hopefully some more details will be coming forward. Next commercial break, I'll look for that. Wells Fargo, good old Wells Fargo. If you ever wonder if a banking institution is crooked, well, you can stop asking questions. It turns out they all pretty much are. Now, Wells Fargo, as you know, got caught stealing millions of dollars from its customers with crooked overdraft fees, creating fraudulent accounts, threatened to fire and blackball employees who tried to stop the frauds. They defrauded broke mortgage borrowers. It turns out they also defrauded 800,000 car loan customers with car loans, forcing 274,000 of them into delinquency and wrongfully repossessing, which is a polite way of stealing, 25,000 of their cars. Did you know in the French Revolution, long before the nobility and the royalty went to the guillotine, the revolutionaries were killing the bankers? It wasn't a coincidence. Rand Paul is out there saying the failure to repeal Obamacare means premiums will continue to skyrocket. The health insurance companies do not have a reason to stop. You are still required to buy those Obamacare-compliant health insurance policies. And the costs are going up. The deductibles are sky high. These are basically useless. The health insurance companies have come out with a very expensive, useless product. And as is always the case when somebody has a very expensive, useless product, they get the government to order you to buy it. We found a video from about a year ago. We put it up as a flashback on what really happened, where John McCain is down there on the floor of the Senate, chastising the Democrats for refusing to acknowledge what a total failure Obamacare is. And yet yesterday he voted against the repeal. He was the deciding vote. If he'd voted the other way, it would have been repealed. Can you say corruption, little children? I knew you could. He either got very nice treatment from the health insurance company lobbyists, or in the last year he has fattened up his stock portfolio with health insurance corporate stock, but for whatever reason, he sold out. And it's having a real world cost. This is a very sad story. And apparently there was a couple, 53-year-old chiropractor, 50-year-old wife, and apparently they were in financial trouble. Their business had just closed. And they committed suicide by jumping out of the window of their recently closed 9th floor office, just a block from the Empire State Building. And in the note that they left behind, they said, we've had a wonderful life. We're ending it because they can't afford health care. All right, let's talk a little bit about computers. First of all, I want to backtrack on something I mentioned yesterday about iTunes and the payment. The interface is non-intuitive, but as it turned out, it worked the way it was supposed to. And I paid for these few apps out of the gift cards that I'd bought there. So that it showed up this morning. Apparently they do the reconciliation overnight. So that's how that worked. One of the problems with the updates is that a lot of the apps we'd already bought and paid for on the Claire's older iPad and my older iPhone had to be updated. And all of a sudden, we're getting all these warnings on apps that are working on our various devices. You click on them, and it says, warning, this has to be updated for iOS 11. Okay, that's going to be fine. Unfortunately, a lot of these app developers have gone out of business. There won't be a version of these very useful tools for iOS 11. And it almost seems like Apple has gone down the dark road right alongside Microsoft of planned and forced obsolescence to get you to buy the same thing over and over and over and over again. Now, again, that being said, the hardware it's amazing. It's so much faster and better than what we had before. I'm very impressed with the hardware. And I'm very glad to have Claire back on an iPhone after that junky Android interface. All right, we're coming up here on a commercial break, and when we come on back, apparently people are starting to analyze Google's new search algorithm, and they're finding a built-in bias, which is not going to be much of a surprise to anybody at all. So we're going to be talking more about this when we come back from these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And boy, all of a sudden it's turning into a dramatic news day. The corporate media is now confirming Priebus is out as White House Chief of Staff. as well he ought to be. And he was allowed to resign, but everybody understands this was a White House chief of staff that was stabbing his own president in the back. Almost reminds me of the movie Dave. And Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly is the new White House chief of staff. So lots of transitions going on over there. For some reason, this is being reported over in Investment Watch blog, the Democrats abruptly shut down the Senate Russia panel. And there's a video there with more details. It's featuring Hawaii's Senator Hirono. Apparently the GOP was starting to ask questions that they didn't really want to have answered. So that's been shut down as well. Lieutenant Colonel Schaffer is out there saying there is now evidence that Debbie Wasserman Schultz used one of the Awan brothers for malevolent activities against Bernie Sanders. So now we know why Debbie Wasserman Schultz is feeling so nervous right now. And one of two things is going to happen. She's going to make a deal and turn state's evidence for whoever is going to be replacing Jeff Sessions, or she's going to get really, really depressed and commit suicide by stabbing herself in the back 16 times. Getting on back to computers. Article that came on out of WSWS.org. Basically, people are analyzing Google's new search algorithm, and they find out that it is de-emphasizing conservative and even extreme progressive websites. Basically, the Google search algorithm is presenting results that are in line with the official statements found in the New York Slimes and the Washington Compost. So Google is now a gatekeeper, which is why so many people are turning away from Google and going to the alternative search engines here. Now, one thing Google did do is they've uncovered, and they're working to block malware that's being used to spy on Android users. And the malware is called Lipizan. Inside the code, track it back to an Israeli technical company called Equus Technologies, which offers tailor-made innovative solutions for law enforcement, intelligence agencies, and national security organizations. And apparently this malware was just all over the place so that somebody somewhere could be spying on you. So let's talk about radiation here. And let's get some callers calling in here, 800-313-9443. Over in St. Louis, there is a Superfund site, and it was declared a Superfund cleanup in 1990, but nothing has been done. They don't know how to clean up this radioactive waste, and now it's leaching out. And what this site is, this was a radioactive waste dump that goes all the way back to the Manhattan Project and the building of the first nuclear weapon. And back then the attitude is we've got to win the war and we don't care what the long-term consequences are. Just dig a hole, put the stuff in there, we'll deal with it later. And it is now much, much later, way too late. The material is leaching out into the local environment and nobody knows how to do anything about it. Same thing that we're seeing over in Fukushima, where they've had to go back to just dumping radioactive wastewater into the ocean. At this point, all of these different governments are so caught up in the immediate necessity of not going bankrupt because of the private central banks, they're not thinking anywhere in the long term. This decision to dump fracking water into the Gulf of Mexico, for example. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And boy, big doings in Washington, D.C., and the corporate media is still going on about how Priebus apparently resigned officially yesterday, and it was kept secret until Air Force One landed at Andrews earlier today. Then the announcement started coming on out. It's also coming on out that Priebus, you need to understand just how powerful that chief of staff position is, because that's the guy who's controlling the door to the Oval Office. If he doesn't want you to see the president, you won't. And apparently one of the big stinks that were going on between Priebus and Scaramucci was Priebus was simply scratching Scaramucci off the president's schedule. So Scaramucci couldn't get together with Trump and find out what he should be talking to the media about. Now, Roger Stone is out there reminding us all that Priebus was instrumental in getting Robert Mueller appointed as a special counsel. Now, Donald Trump appointed Priebus as White House Chief of Staff. He was the former head of the Republican National Committee, and a lot of people were saying, you don't want to do this. This guy, when he was running the Republican Party last year, was openly hostile to the Trump presidency. He wanted somebody else like Ted Cruz, who couldn't actually qualify under the Constitution. So why are you bringing this person on in? And the conventional wisdom was that Trump wanted an opportunity to become friends with Priebus in order to build support within the Republican Party leading into 2020. And again, this is an example of Donald Trump's extreme naivete. He comes from the world of business. People behave a certain way in business. People react a certain way in business. But it's a whole different world in Washington, D.C. politics. It's not really a swamp. It's a snake pit. And Trump is finally realizing that he had some of the snakes a little too close to home. Now, apparently, according to George Webb, the Awan brothers, Imran Awan, the one who was arrested trying to flee back to Pakistan, is apparently connected both to Pakistani intelligence and to Hezbollah. And yet they let this guy inside the Congress with access to all the congressional computers. And apparently there's been an investigation going all the way back to February that shows just how bad this issue is. When it all comes on out, everybody's going to be saying, how did this guy even get in the country, let alone get hired to work inside the Capitol building? Apparently it has come on out that this Imran Awan subscribed to a pedophile-centric YouTube channel. I'm surprised YouTube has that. But it's coming out of the Gateway Pundit. It's just amazing. Maybe everybody in Washington, D.C. is so corrupt that they just didn't notice another one coming on in there. But a lot of people are now starting to look at this issue that Debbie Wasserman Schultz continued to pay Imran as an advisor for 5 months after he was kicked out of the House of Representatives computer system. Did she really just like him that much? Or did he have something on her? Did he have additional copies of the emails? Did he have copies of Hillary Clinton's 30,000 missing emails? It's going to be interesting to see how much can be recovered from those smashed up hard drives. Because you can take a hammer to a hard drive and you can make that outer case look like a disaster. But those rotors are very well protected inside. And if you don't physically open up the drive and go after the rotor, might be surprised to find there's a lot of information still there. A lot of people seem to be very, very scared about that. Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaffer is out there saying the Awan brothers sent sensitive intelligence to the Muslim Brotherhood. Also out there, again, another confirmation, Awan brothers helped Wasserman Schultz screw Bernie Sanders' campaign, taught her how to disguise her voice on phone calls, the ones that were going down to the lawyers handling the class action lawsuit. Wow, it is just It's just amazing. Judicial Watch has just released a document they've obtained under the Freedom of Information Act from Health and Human Services, and the documents are confirming something we knew before, that the problems with healthcare.gov, the Obamacare website, they knew that there were problems. They knew it wasn't ready to launch. And there was a story that came on out shortly after the launch and the disaster it turned into about how President Obama was told this thing is not ready to go. And he literally said it's going to open on the day I say it's going to open on. It just turned into another disaster. Blacklisted News is out there saying Amazon drones will scan your home while they're delivering. I assume they mean the outside. And then you've got your Roomba robot vacuum cleaner scanning the home on the inside. WikiLeaks has released more CIA tools for the stealthy hacking of Apple's operating system. It's just amazing. It goes on and on. All right, so let's pull on back here and do a recap of what's been going on. It's easy to get lost in the details. We know that the current American political scene is dominated by this little clique, which I call the narcocracy. And it's the Clintons and the Bushes and their close associates. And it goes all the way back to Arkansas in the 1980s, which was the northern end of a gun-running operation run by the CIA to supply arms to the Nicaraguan Contras. Now, this was illegal under the Boland Amendment, and so in order to fund this covert operation and keep it out of the eyes of the Congress and the public, they were bringing literally tons of cocaine back into the United States of America along pipeline. And that cocaine was then sold to your children, and the money was laundered through a loose collection of banks like Morgan Guarantee, land flip deals like Whitewater, Castle Grand, Flowerwood, and eventually resurfaced as Arkansas government checks from the Arkansas Development Finance Authority, supposedly as business development loans, except the loans were never repaid. At the end of every month, the books were simply zeroed out. That was the money machine. And the checks were being given out to all these companies that were building and supplying not only the guns for the Contras, but other things like components for small aircraft with hidden compartments to smuggle the drugs back in. And of course, everyone along the way was getting insanely rich, untraceable drug money. And it was just a huge, huge scam. And then Eugene Hassenfuss's plane crashed, and he admitted to the Nicaraguans what was going on. It was an American supply operation, illegal to the Contras, and it triggered what was called the Iran-Contra scandal. And they tried to put the focus on Iran and Gorbinafar and all those other people. And they were holding congressional hearings. And anytime they started getting near any of those Arkansas airports or anything connected to the drug running, chairman of the investigation, Hawaii's Senator Daniel Inouye, would shout executive session. They'd close the doors, kick the public and the press out. That was the part that the public was not supposed to know about, that a big supplier of illegal drugs to our children was the U.S. government itself. Gary Webb, of course, documented all of this in his 5-part series in the San Jose Mercury News called Dark Alliance, which was then picked up and reprinted all over the internet. And Gary Webb was attacked by all the corporate media. How dare you say such things about our government? You're insulting, you're implying our government engages in such things, even though they had been caught red-handed doing it. And ultimately, Gary Webb was suicided. And then you had Sally Denton and Roger Morse, who acquired Barry Seal's paperwork. Now, Barry Seal fit into this. Barry Seal was one of the pilots that was flying the guns down to Nicaragua and bringing them back. And I understand there's a new movie out about him. Tom Cruise is starring, and I'm sure they're going to completely spin this story around. But Barry Seal was one of the drug-running pilots, and he actually got careless, and he got caught by the authorities. And in order to avoid going to jail, he agreed to allow the DEA to put hidden cameras on his aircraft, and he caught some of the Nicaraguan high government officials actually helping to load the plane with drugs. It was a huge, huge scandal. And ultimately, Barry Seal himself was killed. Now, the paperwork he'd collected on all of this wound up in the hands of two reporters, Sally Denton and Roger Morris, and they wrote up an article, The Crimes of Mina, and they worked primarily for the Washington Post, and they took this story into the Washington Post along with all of Barry Seal's supporting documentation, and the Washington Post lawyers fact-checked it, and they cleared it for publication. The Washington Post lawyers said the story is solid, they can prove everything that's in it. And the story was then spiked by the Washington Post's then managing editor, Bob Kaiser, who was a fellow Skull and Bones alumni with President George Herbert Walker Bush. You see how it all starts to tie together? And eventually, Sally Denton and Roger Morris got the article published in Penthouse magazine. And the article is very good. It's very, remember, it was cleared for publication in the Washington Post. And because it was published in the Penthouse, the Washington Post could turn around and say, oh, you don't want to listen. It's published in a magazine filled with naked women. And it's softcore porn. You shouldn't even look at that. So even back then, the corporate media, the Washington Post, were protecting the narcocracy. And the Bushes and the Clintons had acquired enough money to start reshaping America's political system to their own design. And their design was to simply hand the White House off one to each other to make it look like there was still a choice out there. And Obama got in on them in 2008, wound up with the presidency, while Hillary regrouped. And even last year, early in the campaign, we know it's going to be Hillary on the Democratic side. Jeb Bush, Jeb Bush, Jeb Bush. And unfortunately, Jeb Bush couldn't get that deer in the headlight look out of his eyes, and he basically self-destructed. He didn't have the ability to connect with the voters. And then they were out there with Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz and all these other people. And Ted Cruz and Donald Trump just kept plodding along, and the media kept attacking him. And one of the reasons they're so upset with Donald Trump's victory is because the corporate media, as Mika Brzezinski says, the job of the corporate media is to control what the American people are thinking. And the corporate media was trying to get the American people to think, yes, we're going to vote for Hillary. And they failed miserably. And they are in trouble with their corporate masters, the people who sign all those paychecks. And now they're desperate to somehow redeem themselves and get it back with all this Russia-Trump nonsense. Because if they can get Trump out of the White House, they can sort of kind of maybe claim victory. Yes, we're still able to control what America thinks. But they are in a panic over there. I have a feeling things are going to get very, very interesting. Because the corporate media itself is self-destructing. They're stonewalling on all of these other stories, except for Fox News. Fox News is finally starting to cover this stuff. But the more they stonewall and just do Trump, Russia, Russia, Trump, Trump, Russia, they're killing themselves. 6% of them, only 6% of Americans think they're written. And that includes the ones who think it's a bunch of nonsense, as well as those who think it might have merit. But it's Russia-Trump burnout. You can only pound a story into people's heads so many times before they simply turn off. The repetition is good up to a point. This is something we learn in advertising. Repetition is good up to a point. After that, you need to start finding something new, or people are just going to tune you out. And the fact that the New York Slimes, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN are not covering what's going on with the Awan brothers and Debbie Wasserman Schultz It's calling attention to itself. People are noticing that the corporate media is trying to convince us this is not important, that only Donald Trump and Russia are important, and they're failing miserably. It's been feeling like stalemate ever since Trump took office, between the deep state against Donald Trump, corporate media against the independent media. I think the stalemate just got broken. I think Donald Trump is going to become more assertive. He's going to start bringing more people into his administration. I really do hope that he does get rid of Jeff Sessions and appoints an attorney general who is not going to be afraid to start prosecuting those Title 18 felony violations which James Comey admitted on TV Hillary Clinton is guilty of. You don't need a prolonged investigation. The FBI has all the evidence. Just move forward with a prosecution. And the fact that Sessions hasn't done so tells us he's compromised and controlled by the narcocracy. He's got some link to it. The way that Loretta Lynch had been protecting HSBC when it was laundering some of this drug money. Gave him a wrist slap in New York. How James Comey himself was on the board of directors of HSBC while all this money laundering was going on. Trump needs to start reaching outside the Beltway to people who are not part of this narcocracy and bring them on in and let them do the job of cleaning up that swamp. Because he's never going to clean up that swamp by hiring more of those alligators into his own staff. We're going to take a break for commercials. We got a caller waiting on the line. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're getting more information about the Senate shutting down its Russia panel rather abruptly. And apparently the issue was the fact that the head of the fusion company that came up with that crooked Trump dossier was getting ready to testify, and I guess they decided they didn't want to have to go through that embarrassment. So they pulled the plug on it. All right, we're going to take a couple of phone calls here. Sherry in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike. Yes, this morning I checked into a radio show that I used to call back in 2012. And I guess every so often I call in to see how things are going because he's the guy who brung me. I like to dance with who brung me. And they were talking about GMOs back years ago, and I said what I knew about them. Well, after his station check, they changed twice during the years. There were new rules imposed. I had to just be kept on the line. I couldn't, he would just take a message. The producer would just take a message, but I couldn't talk to him anymore. It was too dangerous, you know, these new rules, certain subjects you couldn't talk about and all this. Well, he'd been off for a while, and his substitutes were brutal, horrible people saying terrible things. No callers, of course. I remember once calling the station, he said, welcome, the main guy. He said, welcome to our miserable little show. And then he proceeded to just have like a one-man, it was like a bully pulpit, you know, and there was no callers. This is how it was reduced to with these new rules. Well, after the callers called in and said, how come you taking this stance? You used to always say this. You didn't feel this way. It was never party politics on this station before, you know. Well, he went on a break, and I was thinking, I got to see what happens if he comes back. And I tuned in this morning, and it's like he started praising Trump for the efforts he's trying to make. He was furious that the Obamacare wasn't overthrown, and he got a little panel of people on there since he has this panel every Friday. It's their gang of 4. Sometimes it's a gang of 5, and they talk about all the news from the week. And I didn't have a chance to listen to the whole thing, but he started changing his tune. Well, afterwards, after this gang of 4 thing, they're on for about an hour and a half. Afterwards, here came the callers again, and it was so wonderful. You know, just giving people a little window that now he is starting to see that. You're talking here about
Okay, Sherry, you got to wrap this up because we're coming to the top of the hour, okay?
Well, yes, I know. This is to confirm that the media needs us. And if they're going to pull away and if they're going to panic and pull away and give us a hard time, they're just going to lose. They are shooting themselves in the foot. And I see signs of if you want to survive, you're going to have to join us. And I'm
well,
saying this
it's not
to
a
the
question
corporate.
of joining or something. If you're a news organization, you're supposed to be reporting the news. But as Mika Brzezinski admitted, that's not their job anymore. Their job is to control what we're thinking. And that's why we see all this green screen nonsense and phony location shots and all the rest of it. All right, Sherry, we're going to let you go. We're going to do station identification. We're going to take one more phone call when we come back, and then we're going to join with the lovely Lady Claire. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on BAM User, this gorgeous creature sitting next to me is the lovely Lady Claire with her unique perspective on the world. But before we start with Claire's talking points, let's take a phone call from Don in Iowa. Aloha, Don. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. I Googled wrecked hard drives, Debbie Wasserman. I was trying to find out about these hard drives, and instead what came up was she is an absolute wreck. Debbie Wasserman Schultz is an absolute wreck, barely able to function. So I don't think it looks like she's not really taking it in stride, and she's.
Well, I hope this is. I hope this isn't the run-up propaganda to she got depressed and stabbed herself in the back 18 times.
I don't know, but another thing about this, they found these hard drives. What I read in one of these deals was there was a Marine living there at the new house.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm thinking is that might not actually be. He might have been there on a mission. He might have. When it all comes out in the wash, it might turn out that this guy was there looking for that stuff.
Well, the story that I heard was that he just spotted it in the trash, and apparently the latest development is that Debbie Wasserman Schultz had given these hard drives to the Awan brothers to dispose of. And so they basically took him to this one property that Awan owned. Apparently he owned 2 residences, and he was just whacking them with a hammer and throwing them in the trash. And the Marine was walking by and spotted the stickers on them, which identified them as U.S. government property. And so he basically said, okay, we got to get these back to where they're supposed to be. And Awan threatened him to get them back from the Marine, and at that point, that's when it escalated, and the FBI came on over and took possession. So Awan apparently decided he was going to get the heck out of Dodge, was arrested at the airport, and I'm sure that Debbie Wasserman Schultz is understanding that right now she is a serious liability to the Clintons, and the Clintons don't allow their liabilities to live for very long.
He's an absolute wreck, barely able to function, is what it says here.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I hope that, did you hear that Priebus resigned already?
Yeah, well, he was allowed to resign. I mean, the reality is he was fired after Geraldo Rivera and one of the other Fox News reporters confirmed he's been the main leak to the anti-Trump media all this time. This is a White House chief of staff openly trying to sabotage his boss.
Everybody knew it from day one. From day one, I think everybody kind of pretty much knew it. But
well, we all wondered.
I think Trump had to give that guy a job. He was trying to make friendships with the whole Republican establishment, but it didn't do any good anyway. They're still not his friend. They're still trying to screw him over every time they get a chance.
Oh, absolutely no question about that.
And so he was trying to do that. That's why he took Priebus. He was trying to say, okay, we'll take one of your guys and this and that, but that didn't work. He should have learned from the get-go. He should have just stuck to his guns and got the good guys. Okay, well, I'll let you go and let Lady Claire start her start.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, I think Trump brought Priebus in as chief of staff as a way of mending bridges with the GOP ahead of the 2020 election. But again, Trump is still very naive about how Washington politics works. And I think the part he's missing, he's probably scratching his head and saying, I don't understand why there is all this effort and energy, why they're all so united against me. I don't think he understands the history of the Bushes and the Clintons as they tie into the CIA and all of this gun and drug running that's been going on. And when he finally finds out, I think it's going to hit him as a surprise. So, Lady Claire, what is your first story?
Well, the first story is that a judge, thankfully, has slammed incompetent cops after SWAT raids innocent family for growing tomato plants. You know, this comes from the Department of You Can't Make This Stuff Up. In a huge and significant victory for the Fourth Amendment, the federal 10th Circuit Court of Appeals reinstated a lawsuit brought by a Kansas City couple who endured a SWAT raid over their tomato plants. Robert and Adlin Hart and their 2 young kids were caught up in a county-wide sweep of suspected cannabis growers in a prohibitionist state which still has not even legalized any form of medical cannabis. The judge not only reinstated the Harts' lawsuit, which was dismissed by a federal judge in 2015, but went on to castigate the law enforcement agencies involved. They described the 2012 raid as, and I'm quoting, an unjustified government intrusion based on nothing more than junk science, an incompetent investigation, and a publicity stunt.
I mean, come on.
Hello.
Marijuana leaves look nothing at all like the leaves on a tomato plant. And like so many other people, we're starting to grow vegetables here. And this article, all of a sudden, I'm very, very nervous that we're going to have the cops show up here and have us, it's green and leafy. It must be marijuana. And they're going to kick down the door over here. And I think we need to maybe look at the fact that the decline in American education in general is having a negative effect because your rank-and-file police officers are just so dumb to know what they're looking at, and they're just trained to assume everything they're looking at is either an illegal drug or an illegal weapon, and to respond accordingly.
Oh, and do we have a shout-out, dear?
Yeah, well, we need to do a quick shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining the network, and, of course, the lovely Lady Claire is with us.
And apparently, in the realm of unlawful police raids, this one may take the cake. What happened was there was a Missouri State Highway Patrolman staking out a garden store every day in Kansas City, hopefully to catch some pot growers. And Robert Hart, the gentleman of this family, visited the store with his kids to buy supplies for an educational vegetable garden project in his basement. The sergeant then shared Hart's information with the counterpart in the Johnson County Sheriff's Office, which was planning to raid several suspected cannabis growers on 420. JSCO went through the Hart's trash on 3 occasions, eventually finding what officers believed were cannabis clippings soaked in THC extract. But the marijuana was actually discarded tea leaves. Oh my gosh. And despite a lab technician saying the tea leaves looked nothing like cannabis leaves or stems, deputies Blake and Burns used notoriously faulty field drug test kits, which showed the presence of THC, which didn't exist. These supposed field drug tests were the basis for planning the raid, but the deputies never photographed or documented the tests, leaving Judge Carlos Lucero to note that these circumstances gave the deputies the motive to lie.
Well,
what a nightmare.
There is a known issue with a lot of these field test kits for drugs in terms of they're very simple chemical tests, and that means that there can be false positive for things like certain food vegetables will give a false reading for heroin as one example.
Yeah.
They're not tests that exclude other possibilities. It's supposed to be an initial test that says it might be here. But those field tests are not set up to be definitive and say this is what we're actually finding. And they're supposed to be backed up by the lab technician. In this case, they listen to the lab technician. But again, it comes on down to the fact that the police don't know what they're looking at.
Yep. Yeah. Did you cover this next article?
I mentioned it only briefly. You can go into it in detail.
I would like to, because it's when technology gets creepy that it just doesn't have a great feeling. And the title of this article from Blacklisted News: Amazon drones to scan your house while they're delivering. And apparently preparing for the future means preparing every part of your life to be exposed to the world. But How far is this going to go? The Amazon patent filing that was granted on Tuesday offers a small, intrusive clue. This filing covers data collected as Amazon's drones fly overhead and speedily bring you the purple Lacoste shirt you need to look fetching on a date. But the drones won't be just innocently servicing your needs. This filing says that it will be obtaining data. Now, it didn't really characterize what kind of data it would be looking for, but the implication is that when the drone delivers the product, it's going to be scanning your home. The filing says current data may be received by a computer system, and properties about a destination for the delivery may be identified by analyzing the data. A recommendation may be generated based on, at least in part, on the identified properties.
Okay, what it sounds like to me is basically they're going to be scanning for things like you've got a pool in your backyard, maybe there's skis or other identifiable sporting equipment that will be added to your consumer profile. But it's still very creepy, and I'm definitely not comfortable with that. We're going to take another quick phone call here. Tom in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good afternoon, Michael. Talking about what's going on with the news right now, it's breaking news with this Reince Priebus. I think he's one of the leakers. He's a Bush boy, and I think that Jeb Bush is probably, and the Bush family's probably behind some of these leaks. Wouldn't surprise me that comes out in the news one day. The Bushes, I wouldn't trust them as far as I could throw them. That Jeb Bush is a total idiot. The guy is he's a new world globalist, wants to flood this country like Merkel wants to do to Germany and Europe. This is what Jeb Bush does. He very speaks Spanish and English in his household. But I want to talk about that, and that's another thing, Michael. What is it? Is it? I mean, it's unbelievable what's going on with this immigration situation. Is it Mexifornia, or is it Cal Mexico, or is it what's the name there? Cal Mexico, or is it Mexifornia, or is it Mexico or Mexicus?
But believe it or not, on the border between California and Mexico, there actually is a town named Calexico.
Yeah, that's what I think they want to name the whole state. I'm telling you the truth. But, I think Kelly's a great move for Trump. I think Trump is trying to drain that filthy swamp, that democratic swamp that's up there in Washington, which is a shame what's going on. But I think Trump's doing a great job as far as that goes, and I think that was a great move by putting Kelly in there, and maybe put somebody really strict out of a DHS department. See what he picks. That's gonna be interesting. But I firmly believe this conspiracy that's going on in Washington, Michael, with the leakers. I think that's treasonous. And they never talk about the girl they caught in Atlanta. I don't know if you remember that. Remember the girl they caught was a leaker, and I guess they don't ever put her in the news anymore. There's a girl who was leaking, and they caught her, and I forgot her name, because you don't hear about it no more, but they were going to give her 10 years for doing mass leaks. You remember that about 2-3 months ago?
Yeah, vaguely, but I don't remember her name either.
I know, but that should have been in the news. If that was the opposite, Michael, was a Democrat in control like Hillary, and it was a Republican did that would be in the news 24/7. I mean, you would not stop hearing about this for 2 years until the 2018 election. This is nothing but a conspiracy of unbelievable proportion against Trump. It's disgraceful. You got. Let's look what's going on in Venezuela, Michael. You got a Bernie Sanders type guy would have turned the country just like this country to turn into Venezuela if he got elected. I mean, this is unbelievable. And then you got that lame brain, insane McCain, that moron with the brain tumor or whatever. He promised all this about 7 years. He's talking about health care, and all of a sudden he has the chance to do something, and the last minute he's the vote that kills it.
Yes.
It's unbelievable.
It is.
It's unbelievable what's happening with these rhino rats they have in there. They're not. That's what they should be called, the rhino rats, with the demo rats. I mean, it's unbelievable. You got a guy like Trump who wants to build the wall, save our country from annihilation for guys like George Soros and all these globalist schweinharts, like the Stasi communist berserker who's born in East Germany. I mean, if this is not even being put in the media where Merkel's from, she's a total nutcase flooding Europe with all these Muslims. It's unbelievable. And, Michael, the biggest thing, then I'll let you go. I know you got other callers. The main thing I want you to talk about maybe when you have time on your show, I was watching the news for 3 days in a row, and they kept talking about how the Western man's sperm cell is gone. In other words, there's going to be no breeding of the white race, and that's what they're basically saying. For the next 50 years, there'll be no white babies being born because of the white sperm count. Have you been hearing about that?
I've been hearing about that, and there was another article that came out today where, Muslim men are going around saying that white girls need us to fertilize them because, the white males will be gone here. The only way
that's right, Michael.
The only way that might actually be coming about, we've talked about the epicite gene before, which is this GMO corn that if you eat it, it sterilizes you. And if that were made selective to some kind of a gene that's ethnically sensitive, and Israel's been working on ethnically sensitive bioweapons for decades now, where it only does what it does.
It's funny you bring that up, Michael. It's funny you bring that up. In Israel, I saw a thing on in Israel. They have these settlers, these men settlers. They're going out and having 7, 8 kids like the Mormons did back in 1800s, and they're telling all these Jewish men to take their women and get them pregnant 7, 8, 10 babies. But they're in the Western man, the European males in this country and in Europe, they're being sterilized. This is unbelievable. If this ain't a conspiracy of biblical proportion, I don't know what is.
All right. Well, listen, we're gonna let you go here because we need to get back to Claire's talking points here.
Michael.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're gonna let you go. Thank you for the phone call. It does feel like we're just edging toward a world at war. I mean, Israel seems to be trying to kick up a religious war in the Middle East.
Yeah.
The U.S. is clearly provoking Russia. And speaking of John McCain, John McCain has actually responded to the threat of counter-sanctions by the EU against us for the new Russian sanctions. And McCain's out there saying, we didn't do anything wrong. It's amazing. Anyway, your next story.
Well, it's interesting. You should be talking about Russia and the sanctions against it because apparently PBS has joined the anti-Russia propaganda stampede with a 5-part documentary series that recycles the false and deceptive claims that have become official Washington's dangerous new groupthink. Now, this comes...
By the way, we found out Russia drowned your Android phone.
Oh, no.
It was Russia's fault.
This comes to us from Rick Sterling out of Blacklisted News. And the U.S. government-supported public broadcasting system ran a 5-part series dubbed Inside Putin's Russia. With a different theme each night, it suggests that it's giving a realistic look at Russia today. But the image that is conveyed is of a Russia that is undemocratic, with widespread state repression, violence, and propaganda. Gosh, that sounds remarkably like another country I know.
Yes, it does here. Now, I want to insert a comment here because when I was a kid, growing up in New England farming country, and I went to school, and we were given the social studies book. It was called Our American Heritage, and I remember it vividly because it had this painting of a Mississippi riverboat on the cover, and I thought that was so romantic because we'd all been reading Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, and the era of the riverboats was a romantic period, sort of. And, of course, later in my life, I actually got to live and work on a riverboat. But I digress. The point is, this book was filled with exactly the same kind of thing about how horrible the Russians were and how terrible, and they had all these over-the-top cartoons. And I believed all that nonsense. I really did. And it became part of me, and I carried it forward in life until I actually had an opportunity to meet some Russians. And they turned out to be just like us. It's just like Kennedy said. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future. Yeah. And it was absolutely right. They're just like us. They just want to do what they do, take care of their families, and not be bothered. I got to meet some Russians when I was involved with the space program. When I was over working in Europe, I got snowed in at the Frankfurt airport with an Aeroflot flight crew. And I got to be talking with them because the pilot's son wanted to be a cosmonaut. And I still had a bunch of old NASA pins on the outside of my little carry-on bag. And so I took them all off and I gave them to him and said, this is for your kid. You know, I mean, big thrill. Pins from the other country's space program now. And he was a dad. That was it. He wasn't evil. He wasn't going to rip my head off. He was a dad, and he was proud of his son. What's wrong with that?
Nothing.
So and they're going to pour it on. The corporate media is going to be pouring on all of this utter nonsense about how bad and evil Russia is. And look what they did. They did the same thing with Iran. Ahmadinejad wants to wipe Israel off the map. That turned out to be a lie. And then they're doing it now with North Korea. What a horrible, horrible place it is.
Yep.
And we found all those videos made in North Korea about North Korean life. And, you know, it's not top of the heap, but the people there seem to be very happy and contented and getting along just fine. You need to understand the corporate media's job is to lie to you. And unfortunately, that includes PBS. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Claire, you wanted to continue with this story.
Yes, I did, regarding the PBS demonization of Russia. And one of the claims they made was that Russian identity is based on projection of power. But wait a minute, doesn't that really better characterize the unhinged, surveilled state of America much more than it does Russia?
Of course it does. We had this story that came out on yesterday where the head of the CIA is now out there saying China's the bigger threat than Russia to the United States. And he came on out and said, the threat is they're getting in the way of America's projecting power across the globe.
Exactly. And the U.S. currently has nearly 800 foreign military bases in over 70 countries. In contrast, Russia has military bases in only 2 countries beyond the former Soviet Union, Syria, and I'd like to get to that a little bit later, and Vietnam.
And, of course, China has just opened their first foreign military base as well. They've got a grand total of 1.
Yes.
So it's just like the idea of Russian aggression. Look at who is doing all the attacking and drone striking. And regime changing, and you know who the aggressor is, and it's not Russia, and it's not China, and it's not Iran. It's the United States.
And
we're the Fourth Reich. Get used to it.
You know, and also the way that information was cherry-picked, Mike, ignored crucial information about events in the Ukraine, and Russian involvement in eastern Ukraine and Crimea are presented as examples of projection of power. But facts are completely, this is fact-free. There is no mention whatsoever of the violent February 2014 coup in Kiev, nor the involvement of neoconservatives like John McCain and U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland in supporting and encouraging the overthrow of Ukraine's duly elected government. In fact, in a speech in December of 2013, Nuland outlined her intense involvement with the regime change in Ukraine, including U.S. insistence that Ukraine choose a European future, since the U.S. had invested $5 billion to assist in that regard. And days before the coup, Nuland was captured on audio planning the composition of the coup leadership. It also ignored Crimea's historic connections to Russia and the Ukrainian violence. And the documentary says in 2014 in Crimea, Russia helped install separatist leaders who rushed through a referendum that led to Crimea's annexation. No, no, no. The Crimean people, knowing that there was no decent government left in Kiev, did a referendum where the people of Crimea were asked, do you want to stay with Ukraine or do you want to go with Russia? And 97% of the population voted, yeah, we want to go with Russia. They are Cyrillic-speaking people. It was a logical thing, and then they petitioned the Russian Federation to join. There was no annexation.
Well, again, the way the U.S. gets to that is they refuse to recognize the Crimean people's right to have a referendum, even though it's protected by the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So by default, it's an annexation. And that's kind of like a guest at a wedding refusing to recognize the bride's right to choose that particular groom. Right. Therefore, by default, the groom has kidnapped and raped the bride. Yeah. That's the same exact logic.
The reasoning.
By which the U.S. is out there saying, Russia's annexed Crimea. And again, they're out there. It's the groupthink. These are all treated as articles of faith beyond the need for any actual proof. Like, Russia stole Crimea. Russia stole the election for Donald Trump. Vladimir Putin farts in elevators and all the rest of the other things they're saying.
Speaking of Putin, while the world has been in convulsions elsewhere, Putin yesterday signed a Syrian base deal cementing Russia's presence there for half a century.
Yes.
And I have to sit back and look at this and say, who won in Syria? Russia.
Well, the U.S. is still going to declare victory.
Yeah.
Once ISIS and Al-Qaeda are gone,
Mm-hmm.
the U.S. is going to say, oh, we were never in there to get Assad out.
Right.
We were never in there to put in a puppet government. We were really there to get the terrorists, and the terrorists are dead. Therefore, we are victorious. Even as they scurry home with their tail between their legs.
Yeah, and the base apparently has been...
We have to take a break.
Oh, okay.
There's
Thank
the
you.
music.
All right.
We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Claire, take it away.
Well, we have noticed problems with the Iraqi military. And those problems seem to have been gotten worse. And the one unit that seems to be doing the most of them, according to Human Rights Watch, is linking a specific Iraqi army division, the 16th Division of Multiple War Crimes. They read a lot like many others have. Naked Iraqis handcuffed and escorted into an alley by Iraqi troops from the 16th Division before gunshots ring out. Mounds of bodies found, killed in similar summary execution, all supposed ISIS suspects. This isn't just piling on about what have been really well documented for Iraq, but this is because the U.S. trained and armed the 16th Division, and this has some very specific legal and moral implications, I think, for the U.S.
Well, the U.S. government is above the law, and they certainly don't have any morality.
Yeah, it would seem that any kind of Iraqi taking a suspect in would go by the rules, but apparently that's not happening in Iraq whatsoever.
Okay, we're going to take a phone call here. Very well timed, in fact. Kevin in Indiana, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Kevin?
Mike, you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
I can hear you now.
Yeah, I think maybe your audience has a mental problem because whenever you discuss, Jewish issues going on in the USA, and then you say that America is the Third Reich, your listeners have to be just total mental cases to accept that. Comparing America to the Third Reich after knowing everything is controlled by Jews. I know you don't like to say Jews. You want to say something like Zionists or something like this or that.
Or Israel. Well, Kevin, let me explain why I'm using that parallel.
I didn't say Israel. You have to read the Bible and know what Israel is. So let's just leave that one alone.
Well, no, Kevin,
I know you haven't done that because you don't believe there is an Israel.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin. Okay. Now, let me clarify my comment when I say we're the Fourth Reich. We've been starting wars, or rather the U.S. government has been starting wars on the basis of lies and frauds. Think the Gleiwitz incident. We have a government that is constantly propagandizing the American people, much as the way Goebbels did to the German people. We have the FBI, CIA, NSA spying on Americans constantly to keep us in our place, just like the Gestapo did to the people of Germany. Both the Nazi Germany and the U.S. government have been using torture. So, except for the fact that the Nazis had snazzier-looking uniforms, I'd say there's a lot of parallels there. And by the way, Hitler did hire a fashion designer for those uniforms.
Really?
Yes. Those were designed by one of Germany's leading fashion designers of the day. Mm-hmm. All right, so let's...
The next thing I want to talk about is Iran and the kind of mixed signals that we're getting from the White House. Apparently yesterday, National Security Council member and top Trump advisor on Iran, Derek Harvey, has been fired, effective immediately. Apparently this guy was very hawkish on Iran, and his firing comes amid major cabinet disagreements on Iran policy. And
you need to back up there because, back up a little.
Oh, okay.
I think this is an important part right here.
Okay. Harvey was said to be among the proponents for unilaterally withdrawing the U.S. from the P5+1 nuclear deal, a position which ultimately lost out in recent weeks, as Secretary of State and Defense Tillerson and Mattis managed to convince Trump to take a more measured approach.
Yeah, that was really close. At one point, they were saying Trump was going to pull out of the deal, just pull the plug, and then he finally went along and recertified, then turns around and dumps all those sanctions all over. If I read this correctly, okay, Trump is beginning to realize that all the people pushing for war around him are his immediate enemies. And again, we know for a fact the head of the CIA lied to Donald Trump when he said there was no question Assad gassed his own people at Idlib. So maybe Trump is finally waking up to the reality here. We're going to take another phone call. Mary in Connecticut, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. We were discussing Russia before.
Yes.
I just wanted to say, my mother was Russian, and her parents came over like in the late 1800s, but she didn't speak any English when she first went to school. But anyhow, they spoke Ukrainian, and basically my aunt told me before she died that they were really Ruthenian or Ruskies. And there's a difference. The Russians called themselves that later, but that was, there was an old, over 1800s, there was a empire of Rus. And they did all these dances. I guess you're familiar with that.
They were Vikings.
And all, it was started with a Viking.
Right.
And they did the dances, and they made those onion-type buildings and stuff. In fact, the Russians, but they were later in the Ukraine, so a lot of them call themselves Ukrainian, but they're mixed up with with a lot of them are the Ruskies, or Ruthenians. But also I wanted to say that the Russians were the only country that helped us out during the revolution.
Yeah.
You knew that.
And the Civil War.
You knew that, right?
And the Civil War.
Right. And they actually, let us sail to their ports, traded, sent us supplies. So they really have always been a pretty a good country, I think, except when they got invaded by the Zionists who took over and made communism. But anyhow, that's all I wanted to say.
All right. Well, thank you for the information, and have a good weekend. We're going to let you go. Claire, take it away.
Well, this thing about this firing, mixed messages are really coming down because President Trump apparently is still looking for ways for the U.S. to unilaterally withdraw from the P5+1 deal, even with Harvey gone. And while they were forced to admit that Iran is complying with the deal, but they made it very clear that they are very unhappy about doing so and making a series of non-specific threats about punishing Iran. What for? I mean, this is ridiculous. And so this starts the clock again on another 90-day deadline to certify Iranian compliance. And President Trump has made clear to his aides, as well as other signatories of the deal, his goal is to abandon the deal outright at that time. So what aides have been now explicitly ordered to come up with some plausible rationale for the U.S. to unilaterally withdraw. Now, Mike, I've got to say something about former President Obama. There were many areas in which I was highly critical of him, but the Iran P5+1 deal was not. I think it was a very well-crafted pact, and the Iranians are definitely keeping their part of the bargain.
Yeah, and the United States is not. The United States has yet to unfreeze all of Iran's assets inside the American banking system and to lift all the sanctions. If Trump just pulls out of the agreement, it's going to be like when the U.S. pulled out of the Ballistic Missile Defense Treaty, or like how the U.S. has ignored the provisions of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It's just another signal to the rest of the world that you cannot trust the United States government no matter what promises they make or treaties they sign.
Yeah. Let's bop on over now to Israel. Netanyahu is seeking U.S. support for expelling Arab villages. Now, this idea of a land swap has often been discussed in Israel as a way not only to keep the settlements built in occupied territory, but as a way to get rid of some of their pesky ethnic and religious minorities. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is floating a specific proposal to do just that. Wadi Ara. Israeli Arabs, for now, under the proposal, which Netanyahu is said to have forwarded to the White House, seeking a U.S. imprimatur, the Israeli government would formally annex the Gush Etzion bloc of settlements in the West Bank, and in return would give the Palestinians a series of villages in Wadi Ara.
Well, you know that problem that we have where the world knows that you can't trust anything, any promises made by the U.S. government?
Yep.
Have the same problem with the Israeli government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And again, it's all about grabbing all the land, and the Palestinians won't get those villages.
Yeah.
It just hasn't happened. Israel not only does not keep its promises toward the Palestinians, they feel that because the Palestinians are Palestinians, that keeping promises is not necessary.
Yeah. And did you cover this next article?
Let's see. I didn't get this one exactly.
Okay.
No.
Apparently, Israel has tear-gassed worshippers at Al-Aqsa Mosque, and 113, and that number is going to rise, have been injured. And they expanded their easing of the security and removed surveillance cameras just days after taking out metal detectors. Now, this saw a return of celebrating Palestinian worshippers to the mosque, which is one of the holiest in Islam. And the Israeli police, for no specific reason, started attacking the crowds of worshippers by immediately throwing stun guns into the crowds, releasing tear gas, and confiscating any Palestinian flags people had on them.
Which is weird because technically they're on Palestinian territory.
Yeah. And they also cut power to the Qibli Mosque, a building on the Al-Aqsa site, to try to force Palestinians to flee the area. Mike, they're provoking and provoking and provoking.
Of course they are.
Yeah.
With Syria winding down,
yeah.
Netanyahu needs something else to make the Israeli people feel afraid, so they're not paying attention to his trial for corruption.
Right. Yeah, it's really nasty out there. And the following article came from antiwar.com. President Trump, the only American first Afghan policy is to get out of Afghanistan. Now, there are a couple of people who have written on the issues of Iraq and Afghanistan. That would be Dave Petraeus and Michael O'Hanlon. And O'Hanlon has apparently co-authored a piece in the Wall Street Journal with former CIA director and four-star General David Petraeus that takes aim at most of the opposing views of continuing the war and argues that the U.S. must consider Afghanistan the center of a generation-long fight against extremism with no definition of victory. What in the world are these people thinking?
Well, remember, Afghanistan was about an oil pipeline right-of-way at bargain basement prices and access to the opium poppies for the American drug lords.
Yeah.
And we have got photos of the coalition troops, some of them with the U.S. flag up here on the shoulder, guarding and protecting the opium poppy fields and loading the sacks of raw opium onto the trucks.
Yeah.
And when we were in Vietnam, same thing. Air America was bringing down opium from Kunsas plantations in Burma, was processed into heroin in labs in Vietnam and smuggled back into the United States inside the body bags of our Vietnamese dead.
Yeah.
And the CIA has been up to its neck in drug running for pretty much almost all of its career.
Yep.
And if you think very carefully about the very close ties between the CIA and the Skull and Bones fraternity, and then realize the Skull and Bones fraternity itself was initially funded with opium money, granted it was legal at that time.
Yeah.
And you will see that, again, these are the roots of the narcocracy.
Yeah. The most intelligent thing that U.S. and NATO leadership could possibly do, in my perspective, Mike, is to have their troops exit as quickly as safely possible, then negotiate with whatever government is left standing in Kabul for the pipeline and the mineral rights. And as you mentioned, it was President Bush who made the decision to go to war against Afghanistan when he didn't get the price he wanted from the Taliban for the pipelines. Now let's bop over to North Korea. General Joseph Dunford, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, warned the same committee that North Korea's behavior posed an increasing threat to the U.S. and our allies. And they're starting to develop long-range missiles specifically intended to threaten the security of the homeland and our allies in the Pacific.
Now, they fired another test missile today, but the reason to have those missiles, and it's the reason that our government justifies ICBMs, is to deter an invasion.
They're defensive. Hello.
Ultimately, yes, they're defensive. Nobody just hauls off and drops nuclear weapons on other countries, the only exception being the United States.
Yeah.
The entire reason to have those weapons is to discourage other countries from coming on in and trying to plunder your nation.
Yeah.
It is a weapon of deterrence, and you don't throw away that deterrent for no valid reason. Even if Saddam had nuclear weapons, he never would have used them unless really provoked. Same thing applies to Iran, and the same thing applies to North Korea.
Yeah.
What the United States wants is a world that is disarmed of serious deterrent weapons in order to pick off country after country after country after country after country.
Right. And in a very disturbing development, the American people appear to have been listening to what this gentleman is saying and all the other people talking about North Korea. A recent CNN poll found that 37% of Americans believe that the DPRK poses an immediate military threat to the United States, and 67% of them favor sending U.S. troops to defend South Korea.
That's assuming that you can trust CNN to conduct an accurate poll.
Yes.
And if you think CNN is being accurate in the polls, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you.
Yeah. But the problem is that Kim regime has seen the United States intervene militarily all around the globe. They have used armed forces to promote regime change in Grenada, Panama, Haiti, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya. And this government is not going to be so foolish as to trade its ability to deter for a potential invasion.
Libya made that mistake.
Yeah.
Libya made the mistake. Every one of these countries, and in the long run, Iran may have made a mistake as well. But that's what the U.S. is really after, to disarm all these other countries so they can't resist when they're being invaded. It's why the gun grabbers want to take away your Second Amendment rights so the criminals can just walk into your home and help themselves to your wealth, or the government can come on in and shoot you when they feel that you know too many dark secrets about the Clintons.
Yeah. And if there was ever a case of a paranoid state having a real enemy, it is North Korea. And
okay, we got to take a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment of our program on this Pauhana Friday. And Claire, what have you got to fill these last few minutes?
Well, unfortunately, there has been a development in response to North Korea's missile launch. Apparently, there are going to be additional THAAD missile launchers to be deployed at a U.S. base in South Korea. South Korean President Moon Jae-in has announced that a new set of missile interception launch platforms will be deployed at a U.S. military base in South Korea, according to a public news outlet, Yonhap. And 2 of the 6 have been rolled out, and it looks like the additional 4 are going to happen. And what President Moon of South Korea has done is he has called for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council after the test, which appeared to be a medium-range intercontinental ballistic missile today. And he's called for stronger sanctions. So I don't know, Mike, but I'm concerned because China is also making noises to stop the deployment of the THAAD system because it feels that its own defensive capabilities are being impinged by this.
Or its own deterrent capabilities are being threatened. Russia's saying exactly the same thing. This idea that they're putting these THAADs all over is every country that has a nuclear deterrent is now feeling that they are under threat by U.S. invasion.
Right. And now, finally, I'd like to go to an area of the world that's rapidly devolving into another hotspot. India and Pakistan conflict threatens the world with nuclear catastrophe. And tensions are growing over the disputed territory of Jammu and Kashmir. 11 people have been killed this month, another 18 injured amid violations of the ceasefire along the line of control, which is the border between Pakistan and India. RIA Novosti contributor Ilya Plekhanov warns that the conflict risks turning into a threat to global stability.
Not that we have a lot of stability left.
Yeah, and apparently the Indian defense minister accused Pakistani forces of targeting civilians in artillery attacks. Meanwhile, following ceasefire violations on 21 July, Pakistan blamed India for violating ceasefire norms and summoned the Indian Deputy High Commissioner to discuss the issue. And apparently the Indian ex-minister of Information and Broadcasting, Venkaiah Naidu, recently nominated as the National Democratic Alliance Party's candidate for vice president, said on Sunday that Pakistan should remember its loss in the 1971 India-Pakistan War, after which Bangladesh broke with Islamabad and maintained its independence. Now, this is even getting hotter because former Indian Defense Minister and opposition Samajwadi Party Chairman Mulayam Singh Yadav claimed that China was preparing to attack India and was looking to use the Pakistani nuclear arsenal against Delhi. Hello.
That doesn't make a lot of sense.
No,
China's
it
got
doesn't.
its own nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And again, just too many people out there looking at their own situations and acting like a new war is their best option. Okay, there's the music. Time for us to get on out of here. Powhana Friday. Have a good weekend. We'll be back on Monday on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller's program. And remember, everything that you learn here and at the website, you share it with everybody that you know. And have a good America.